Landing disaster.
What about the CAA
National scandal.
One at a time.
We lost both engines, searching for a place to land.
So what went wrong with PIA Flight 8303? The doomed journey. On the morning of May 22, 2020, while the entire nation of Pakistan was still under a COVID-19 lockdown, PIA Flight 8303 was permitted to take off from Lahore to Karachi. It was a journey that only lasted just over an hour, connecting the two major cities. On board were 99 people, most of them trying to return home after being stranded for weeks. The Airbus A320 was nothing special. It had been in service for over 15 years and had just undergone technical inspection and maintenance after 2 months on the ground. Technically, it was a completely airworthy aircraft. The flight crew consisted of 2 experienced pilots who were familiar with the route. The sky that day was clear and the wind was light. The flight left Lahore on time, flying steadily at an altitude of over 9,000 meters. Everything was normal. There were no warning signals from the system. But what no one expected was that precisely when everything was the calmest, a chain of errors began to form. Small, seemingly harmless decisions that would lead the aircraft into disaster. As they approached Karachi, no one in the cockpit crew knew they were flying into an airport that had changed its landing procedures due to the pandemic. Several seemingly minor details, the communication frequency, the approach direction, and the time pressure began to create chaos. From this point, the short journey between the two Pakistani cities gradually turned into a race against death that no one could stop. Undisciplined crew. Captain Sajjad Gul, 58, was a longtime pilot at Pakistan International Airlines. He had been evaluated as confident, perhaps overly confident. Many colleagues said he often ignored standard procedures, especially when he believed his personal experience was enough to handle any situation. First Officer Usman Azam, 33, was a young pilot with less experience and had been noted for slow reactions in a few training flights. Nevertheless, they were assigned together to operate Flight 8303 that day. Both were in the month of Ramadan, a time when they had to fast, abstain from food and drink, for many hours. For pilots, this significantly affects concentration and alertness, especially during complex flight phases like takeoff and landing. Audio data showed that throughout the flight, the two were constantly chatting about the pandemic, family, and social issues, topics unrelated to their duty. In the cockpit, discipline, which is always considered the line between safety and disaster, had virtually disappeared. The captain did not follow the checklist, and the first officer did not remind him or object. No one focused on the critical flight parameters. And as the plane neared Karachi, that lack of focus would prevent them from realizing they were preparing for a completely wrong approach, a mistake with no chance for correction. Chain of errors during approach. When PIA Flight 8303 began descending toward Karachi Airport, everything quickly went off course from standard procedure. The crew did not conduct the mandatory pre-approach briefing, a crucial part that helps determine the landing direction, speed, and contingency plan in case of issues. Instead, they continued chatting, skipping cross-checks and failing to reconfirm basic parameters. The aircraft was then at nearly double the necessary altitude for the remaining distance. On the radar screen, air traffic controllers didn't understand why the crew continued to land on such an incorrect trajectory. They warned that the Airbus was too high and too fast, but in the cockpit, the warning was ignored. The captain decided to proceed with the approach anyway, a choice that any pilot would understand as a major risk. When the aircraft passed 5,000 feet, its speed was still nearly 100 kilometers per hour above the standard. The unstable approach warning sounded continuously, but neither pilot called for a go-around. They believed they could land safely, despite technical limits and advice from the control tower. In the world of aviation, a chain of small errors often kills more than one big mistake. And at this moment, that chain had formed from overconfidence, lack of discipline, and a stubborn decision that would turn into an irreversible tragedy in just a few minutes. The first disastrous landing. As the Airbus A320 approached Karachi's runway 25L, all parameters were incorrect. The plane was too high, too fast, and most critically, the landing gear had not been deployed. Despite this, the captain continued the landing, ignoring the series of urgent warnings sounding in the cockpit. The aircraft touched down hard on the runway with its belly. Both engines, located under the wings, scraped directly against the ground at a speed of nearly 300 kilometers per hour. A sound of grinding metal, a series of sparks, and smoke erupted from beneath the fuselage. In seconds, the control system registered a sudden increase in engine temperature, multiple sensor failures, and oil pressure dropping to zero. Ground radar stations saw the aircraft skid on the runway with a fire trail hundreds of meters long. But instead of stopping, the captain decided to perform a go-around. That is, increase thrust and circle back for a second landing attempt. That decision went against all safety rules. Both engines were severely damaged after the impact and were no longer capable of stable operation. The Airbus struggled to leave the ground, leaving a trail of black smoke behind. In that moment, they had crossed the boundary between control and loss of control. From here, PIA Flight 8303 was no longer a normal journey. It was the struggle of a dying machine, suspended in the sky over Karachi. Loss of both engines mid-air. As the Airbus A320 attempted to climb back up after the failed landing, both engines were critically compromised. The fan blades were torn, the engine casing was scorched, and oil was leaking out. For the first few minutes, the engine still generated some thrust, but the indicators began to drop rapidly.
Oil pressure detected.
Oil pressure decreased,
temperature exceeded.
temperature spiked, and the warning system sounded continuously. Then, almost simultaneously, both engines stopped working. The characteristic roaring sound of the jet vanished, replaced by a chilling silence. The Airbus was now just gliding through the air by inertia, like an iron bird that had lost its wings. No thrust, no ability to regain altitude. The crew attempted to restart the engines, but failed. Fuel remained, but the engines were completely dead after the previous impact. The main electrical power also disappeared, leaving only a small device called the ram air turbine, an emergency windmill, providing limited energy to a few basic systems: radio, flight controls, and some cockpit equipment. From the ground, air traffic control only heard a short, urgent voice.
We lost both
We have
engines.
lost engines.
Searching for a
Looking
place to
for a
land.
place to land. The aircraft was now just a huge metal mass, silently gliding over the sky of Karachi, with no chance of flying again. Desperate effort and the final crash. The Airbus A320 glided through the air at an altitude of just a few hundred meters, heading towards Jinnah Airport, Karachi. In the cockpit, nearly all systems were paralyzed. No thrust, no time. The captain attempted to steer the plane toward the runway, hoping to glide down by inertia. But in that situation, any wrong maneuver could cause the aircraft to freefall. When the distance to the airport was just over a kilometer, the captain decided to lower the landing gear to prepare for impact. It was a professional reflex, but also the final mistake. Lowering the gear increased air resistance, causing the speed to drop faster. The aircraft began to lose altitude at an uncontrollable rate. The warning system emitted a piercing sound: stall, stall, meaning the plane was falling due to a lack of lift. In the final seconds, they tried to pull the control stick to keep the nose up, but there was not enough power to continue flying. At 2:39 p.m., PIA 8303 crashed into the Model Colony residential area, just over a kilometer from the runway threshold. A fireball erupted in the crowded neighborhood. 97 people died, only 2 survived. On the ground, houses were destroyed, but most residents escaped death. The subsequent investigation confirmed it was not a technical fault, but a chain of human errors, starting with overconfidence and ending in tragedy. Consequences and national scandal.
One at a time. We will address
While smoke was still rising over Model Colony, the Pakistan Investigation Commission quickly began its work. The black box was found, data was analyzed, and the truth gradually emerged. Not a technical fault, but human error. The 2 pilots had ignored landing procedures, bypassed a series of warnings, and discussed unrelated topics throughout the most critical phase of the flight. That lack of concentration turned a routine flight into a disaster. When the official report was released, the public was shaken. Not just because of the negligence in the cockpit, but because of what happened next. Pakistan's Minister of Aviation revealed that nearly 40% of the country's pilots had invalid licenses or had used proxies to take exams. The entire aviation industry was dragged into a crisis of confidence. A number of international airlines immediately banned Pakistani pilots from operating their aircraft. The European Union suspended all of PIA's operations in European airspace, and the US did the same. In a few weeks, Pakistan, a country with a long history of flying, became the center of a global scandal. The PIA 8303 crash not only took the lives of 97 people, it exposed a deeper illness, looseness in training, overconfidence in oversight, and a system that had forgotten that in aviation, even